Hey everybody, so I am going to very briefly go through what we've explored in class, which is creating bones or armatures and parenting meshes to those armatures and then using those armatures to move the mesh around. And there's two different ways that we explored how to do this in class. The first way, right now I'm just scaling this out pretty long, and I am going to go into edit mode by pressing tab. I am now going into loop cut by pressing Control R, and I'm just going to give this a bunch of loop cuts. And the reason I'm giving this a bunch of loop cuts is because we need these cuts in order to be able to move the mesh. We will be creating a skeleton that lives inside of this mesh, but in order to move it, this mesh needs to have lines that break up its topology. Great, so I've created the mesh that I want to move. Now I'm going to go ahead and add a bone. I'm going to press Shift A. Oh, sorry, I'm still in edit mode. I'm going to press Shift A. I'm going to go to Armature, and I'm going to create a single bone. I'm going to slide this all the way down to the end. I'm going to press R. I'm going to rotate this so that it is facing this way. Now, two things. One, if I go into edit mode for this bone, I'll be able to move it around. I'll be able to drag this. I'll be able to rotate it in much the same way I would with anything else. But if I click on one of the small nodes right here, I can press E and actually extrude out another bone from it. So I'm just going to continue to do that right now. I'm going to try and do it on this axis. It's usually pretty easy if I have the orthographic view on from the side. But if not, I can always hold down on the mouse wheel and actually get onto that axis right there. And these are going to be the control points at which I bend my mesh. Oh. So I want to make sure that I have a good amount if I want this to be a pretty articulated kind of snake, worm, caterpillar kind of thing. And then for the last bone, I always drag it a little bit further out. Just this will make it easier to select in the future. Great, so now I have the two elements that I need for my first demonstration. I have my mesh, and we can see it has a lot of cuts inside of it. And then I have my armature, my bones, and I have a good amount of them so that this can be a pretty articulated mesh. Great. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to parent this mesh to this armature. And the way that I do that is I first click on the thing that I want to parent, so the thing that I want to make the child, and then I shift click onto the thing that I am parenting it to. And in this case, I'm going to press Control P. Now, when we were working with empties before, we didn't get all of these options down here for the armature to form. And we have a few selections that we can choose. Today, we're really focusing on with empty groups and with automatic weights. With this example, I'm going to use with automatic weights. And what this means is that I am designating, I'm giving it up to the computer to designate how much of this mesh each one of these bones moves and operates, and to what degree it can move and operate that part of the mesh. We can go into weight painting later and actually specifically designate the gradients of how much we want each bone to move our mesh. It's a very involved process. For something like this, which is kind of like a long tube that's not extremely complex, it makes a lot of sense for us to be able to use automatic weights. So let's see this in action right now. First, I'm going to go into pose mode, and you'll see now I can select any bone, and I'm going to press R. Whoa! Okay, I am able to move this. Now notice two things. When I rotate this, every bone beyond this point is rotated as well, and nothing on this side is rotated. Essentially, every bone that comes off the skinnier part is parented to the node before it. So this bone is parented to this bone is parented to this bone is parented to this bone, and so on and so on and so on. Once we start to create more complicated meshes like humans or cats or dogs or monsters, it'll be important to know what is parented to what. Now, I can go ahead, I can animate this. In fact, if I go over here into the bone properties, you'll see each one of my bones has a property. Whoa, there we go. That I can move around and animate much in the same way we've been animating our objects in our scene. Another way to deal with this that I find really useful is if I go over and I click on this small little drop down menu over here, I can go into this tools area and I can say auto IK. And what this is this is inverse kinematics. So if kinematics is me articulating the parent, which is then changing the child, it's kind of a tedious process, but most of the time when we actually move our hands or move our arms or move parts of our body in the real life, we're moving the hand and the rest of our arm just follows. So how can we go ahead and mimic this? Well, if I go to Auto IK and I now select this bone at the top and I grab it, you'll see that I'm able to actually change the location of the parents based on the child. And if I'm using the grab tool right now, if I change my scroll wheel, I'm actually able to choose to what point it goes up to. So I can choose to what parent I want to have this effect take place. And for a lot of animations, this is what I go to immediately. When we look at meta rigs and rigging, it will often default to an inverse kinematic setup so that you can move around your characters like this. If I did want to record this, I'm just going to go into my timeline view. I'm going to turn this on. I'm going to press A, G. I'm just clicking. You'll see that we have that little node right there. Now, instead of moving that around, I'm just going to move this over here. I'm going to press A. I'm going to press, let me turn this automatic on. I'm going to press G, click. It's pretty easy to move this around. Of course, I can wow. I can move it around directly myself. So, this is great, but say for instance you wanted to create something like a robot that didn't really deform the mesh, but instead had discrete parts that were themselves untouched or unmanipulated by the armature. In this case, I'll go back to this one last time. Tool, let's go pose. Auto IK is on, great. In this case, you'll see that it is bending and distorting the mesh as I move it around, right? What I want is say, for instance, like two squares that rotate next to each other and don't distort. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to create another cube. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to press Control Copy and I'm going to press Control V. I'm just going to make this really skinny. And obviously I could do a more detailed job of making this look a very specific way, but this is mainly just for a demonstration. There we go. I'm going to make it look like that. And then I'm going to go Control V. And I'm going to make this look like that. Now, right now I have overlapping meshes, which isn't the best practice, but this is simply for a demonstration. In other circumstances, you could create more complex meshes that go around each one that you actually kind of see on cranes and oil rigs and things of that sort, things that have an axle. But right now, let's just use this approach. I'm going to press Shift A. I'm going to add an armature. I'm going to add a single bone. It's going to end up at my origin over here. Whoop. Whoop. Great. And let me go ahead and move this down. Now, now that I'm working with more discrete parts, the important thing is I want to put this little node exactly where I imagine my axle would be. So I'm going to put it right around there. That seems appropriate for where this would rotate. And then I'm just going to go ahead. I'm going to press E. And I'm going to press E. And actually, for the sake of making this a little bit easier for us, I'm actually going to make these not overlap. And you'll see why in just a second. Okay. Okay, great. Now, let's go ahead and do something that we haven't done before, but is really useful in this case. I'm going to select all of these independent meshes with shift click, and I'm going to press Control J. And what that automatically does is it turns them into one shape where I can go and open the edit menu, and they are all present in there. They're treated as one object. So now that I have this joined and I have my armature ready, let's go ahead and parent this mesh to this armature, but in a way that's a little different. So first off, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to select my mesh, then I'm going to select my armature because I'm parenting it to the armature. I'm going to go over and press Control P. And in this case, instead of saying with automatic weights, I actually want to go with empty groups. Great. Now, if I go ahead and I try to rotate this, right now, nothing is going to happen. And that is because I have essentially set up a variety of vertex groups, and those vertex groups are assigned to each and every one of these bones. So I am specifically designating what vertices are controlled by which bones. It gives me a lot of control, but it takes a little bit of extra steps. So how do I go ahead and actually change? I'm going to go out of pose mode into object mode. How do I change what vertices are assigned to which bone? Well, right now I have my mesh selected. You'll see that the mesh is orange and the armature is not. And I'm going to go down here into the data, object data properties. Now this is typically in like a camera. This is where you would see the camera controls. For a mesh, you're going to see your vertex groups. And what I'm doing right now is I'm going into edit mode, and I am now in a place where I'm going to decide what vertices are assigned to which bone. So I know that this bone down here is my first bone. I have all of these vertices selected for my first shape, and I'm going to click my first bone and I'm going to say assign. Now I can check to see if these have actually been assigned by pressing deselect, select. Great, it works. Now I'm going to go to bone 1. I'm going to say these are the ones that I want. Oh, these are the ones that I want. For bone 1, I'm going to say assign. And let's deselect those, select those. Great, that's working well. And then for my last bone, I'm just going to select these. I'm going to say assign. Let's deselect, let's select. Great. Now let's go into the side view and let's go back into pose mode. Oh, I have to get out of edit mode and I have to click on this and then I have to go into pose mode. And let's see if this is working. Whoa, okay. So right now I have 3 cubes that are not deforming. They are simply staying their own shape, and I can rotate them and manipulate them much like a lamp or a piece of machinery would look like. So we are going to explore easier, more automated ways to rig characters, but in terms of rigging something the inside of your world, these are 2 approaches that I find really, really helpful. Of course, you can use inverse kinematics with this as well, but you will want to add some constraints to how these kinds of things can bend. You can do that over here by adding these little locks to the different bones. In this case, I really only want, oh, nope, don't want that. I really only want these to rotate on the y-axis. So I'm just going to select that. Just going to say just Y. No, thank you. I don't want to scale any of these. Don't want to scale any of these either. And actually, this isn't going to rotate at all. And the location is not going to change. Great. So now let's go into pose mode and see what happens. Oh, I did the wrong rotation, didn't I? I want this to rotate along the... Is it the x-axis in this regard? Yes, okay. It's the x-axis in this regard. Play around with it, see what works. In this case... Oh, it is not... Let's see. No. Can't imagine this would be... That is kind of strange. Okay, in this case, I needed to isolate this down to the z-axis. And if I go into inverse kinematics here, you'll see I can control it very, very easily without really much work at all now that I've set up my armature. And then if I go into this view, you'll be able to see it a little bit more clearly. So try both of these out. See what works for you depending on your project. And we'll look at more automated approaches to work on this later. Bye.